So Poor Things is the new film by Yargos Lathimos, and it is simultaneously the funniest and horniest movie that I've seen this year. So, like, when I originally, like, saw, like, the trailers for this, I got the impression, like, it's based on a book, which I sadly have not read, but I kind of want to read it after watching the film. But the way that the film is staged, like, it seems like it's basically, what if Frankenstein's monster was a woman, and it was all about her just discovering sex and all the weird stuff that goes on in the world. And, like, at least that's the idea I got in my head, and the way that it unfolds is pretty much kind of like what I expected for this type of premise, but at the same time, it also goes into weird and wild places and finds just the pitch perfect, like, darkly comedic moments of absurdity for this weird film, which I know, like, you know, it's a Yargos Lathimos film. You know, he's done stuff like The Favorite and The Lobster. So if you've seen those films, you're used to kind of like a little bit of his weirdness, but I dare say that this is probably my favorite Yargos Lathimos film, just for how much it engaged me so much throughout. So if you haven't, so basically the premise of this film is that Emma Stone plays Bella, who is a woman that has been rescued by Dr. Godwin Baxter, played by Willem Dafoe. And Godwin has basically saved this woman from death. So I don't know how much of a spoiler this will be, just because, like, I mean, there's a lot of shocking stuff that goes on in the film, so, you know, hopefully this won't be a big spoiler. But what he's discovered is that he found this dead body of this woman, and that she was pregnant, and he decided that, well, her brain is too damaged, so I'm going to take the brain of her child and put it in her head. So Bella is basically, you know, it's a child's brain in a grown woman's body. So what Godwin decides to do, you know, Godwin is this guy who's, you know, he's been used to being, you know, dissected. Like, he has a horrible history with his father, who did all this experimentation on his body, and Godwin has just kind of like continued that legacy of, you know, exploring, you know, what it is to, you know, cut open the human body and experiment with it, and all his experiments are littered throughout his house. Like, he's got dogs with the heads of ducks. He's got chickens with the heads of dogs. Just weird stuff. He's got cadavers and open bodies and brains in jars and all this, like, weird mad scientist stuff. So Godwin is trying to, you know, do a little bit more experimentation with Bella, and wants to kind of like broaden her horizons. Like, when we're first introduced to Bella, you know, she can barely form words or talk. You know, she kind of like struggles to walk around and form sentences, and she pees all over the floor, and she, you know, she's just coming to understand stuff about the world and her body. So Godwin is basically studying up on what Bella is, you know, is doing with herself and understanding the world and how she forms words. And then just one day she discovers masturbation. And she likes it a lot, and then she starts, like, you know, showing it off to other people, and other people are like, oh, that's not acceptable in society. So she's kind of like slowly learning, you know, what it is to, you know, be in touch with her body and understanding how society interprets sexuality. Now, this ramps up even further when she meets Duncan, played by Mark Ruffalo, who has basically kind of like wooed her into saying, like, hey, you know, your father, you know, Godwin, you know, wants to keep you locked up here. Why don't you come travel the world with me? You know, I'll show you all kinds of cool stuff. You know, I'll take you on vacations and on trips. We'll have wild sex throughout it. And of course, like, you know, Bella's like, oh, of course, you know, I want to get out of the house and, you know, just sweeten the deal. So they go off on this bizarre journey. Like, and when I say bizarre, like, everything in the film is shot in this very weird way. Like, most of the time there's like this fisheye lens where everything feels weird and distorted. There's this very like off-key soundtrack where even when things are trying to seem like beautiful and sweet, they're always like, you know, off-key and seems like a little bit weird, which is like the perfect setting, like the perfect tone to set for this type of setting, especially when you look at like all like the picturesque backgrounds and like the exaggerated style. Not to mention like all the costumes that Bella wears, like everything that Bella wears has like huge, like big puffy shoulders on her dress, which is just wonderful little touches. And I love how the film is pretty much just Bella's odyssey. Like she goes from just barely being able to form words to barely being able to form words. She goes from all that to, discovering sexuality, to understanding, how stuffy society is, to, to being in touch with vices, to understanding philosophy and capitalism and social structures, to just become a more intelligent woman. And the more that she becomes intelligent on this journey, the more that she angers someone like Duncan. Like Duncan just saw her as this naive woman who just wanted to hang around him and have sex, and she'd be so easily impressed. But the more intelligent she gets, and the more like observant she becomes of the world, the more she realizes that Duncan is just not right for her, and she kind of just more or less lets him down in a way where it's like she realizes this isn't going to work out. She's like, I want to see the world, I want to help people, I want to, explore more of my sexuality. I want to do more stuff with life. And, if you don't want to join me on that, then I guess that's your problem. So you basically get to watch Mark Ruffalo go from this like suave guy who kind of like thinks he understands the entire world and knows how to manipulate women and kind of favors himself as a bit of a playboy, to just descending into just this madness of, like this woman who's trying to make sense of the world and just like easily angering this doofus who deserves to be sended up. And it's just beautiful to like watch him like crumble and just go become like a mess by the end of the film. And I love how like there's also this building mystery about who Bella was before, Godwin found her. And that kind of comes around by the end of the film for like a bit of an odd twist where she kind of like, she more or less wants to find like the closure of who she was. But at the same time, she also wants to assert herself, against someone who would rather, keep her locked up within like, her strict role within society than explore, anything else that the world has to offer. And the way that kind of Bella just kind of, proceeds through this story with just realizing that, this isn't to the best of my benefit. And she just kind of like states, the problems of the world in this very matter-of-fact manner that she approaches everything to where like, if I look at it just the right angle, you could see like a little bit of I could apply like a little bit of like autism film theory to the way how she approaches everything in life practically and understands the world even more than some people seem to think they do. I was almost kind of reminded of the film Being There, in which it's kind of like the joke that like everyone is kind of like misinterpreting this person. They look down on this person as kind of like a child, but ultimately they learn a little bit more about the world and they become much more not only cognizant of how the world operates, but able to find more of their own happiness within that world, which is so fascinating and so like sublime with how it unfolds in this film that you're really rooting for Bella and just like her adventure in general, which takes her on like cruises where she meets deeply philosophical people that she talks openly with sex about, to venturing to poor places where she gives money away, to venturing to brothels where she understands the mechanics of sex and how like she can discover more of herself through there and meet more interesting people through there, and kind of become more understanding of the world. Like I love how like Bella only recognizes like Duncan as almost kind of like the pinnacle of sex just because she's like, it's the one guy she's had sex with the most. But then when she realizes that, other people are not as good at sex and they're not as, they don't have the same stamina, she's kind of like, oh, okay, sex isn't that much of a big deal. It's just like this thing that entices people. And it doesn't always feel good, but I understand how it works, and I understand how it works within society, that I can maybe manipulate it and, kind of assert myself a little bit more in my practice. Which is just like, I love the way that it unfolds in a manner that's both like, that feels both like astute and absurd for how the world operates. Because like, I guess like I have to preference this by saying that this is not going to be a film for everyone. And by that, I mean like it goes to like the most absurd areas of comedy. Like, cause like when I said it's the funniest and the horniest film this year, I mean that simultaneously. There are scenes where it will just smash cut to like wild sex acts and then just, silly sex acts. And it's all treated with like a level of eroticism, but also a level of just weirdness and like dark humor throughout that, like, you can't help but laugh at it. But like outside of that, there's just like some genuine moments of just like funny dialogue. Just like Bella's a treasure trove of just hilarious bits. There are so many quotable lines from her. Like at one point, she speaks openly about sexual euphemisms while dining at a hotel with these upper class people, and it just offends everyone at the table. And she cuts it off by hearing a crying baby in the distance. Like, excuse me, I gotta go punch a baby. And it's just the way that she just kind of like casually goes through recognizing the things that don't work in life and the things that bother her and the things that she wants to do for happiness. It's just so hilarious. And outside of that, just visually, there's just like gross out and hilarious gags, like especially really early on within Godwin's laboratory, where he's got like naked bodies open, like in which like Bella's like playing with the penis of one of them, and she's like stabbing them, and just like the way that the characters are assembled are weird too. Like Godwin, is very open about, how like he was experimented on and how his body is a lot different from other people. And he brings up how at one point, how he can't quite process food. So he requires like, a special machine that essentially creates like giant burp bubbles that kind of like vomit out of his mouth. So when I say this film is funny, I mean this film is funny from all angles. Like, it's funny on like the sexual level, on like the darkly comedic angle of its observant ways of the world. It's funny on a gross out level with like, like the nudity on display and like the way that bodies are like violated and just like vomit and have like all this disgusting, blood and guts on the screen, the weird experimentation. And yet, because it's Yargos Lathimos, it's always treated with like a sense of earnest, where even though it's like weird and dark, there is like a heart to it. Like there is a point to it. It's not just like weird for the sake of weird. There actually is a point to Bella's journey, and you do feel something for her by the end. That like by the time it gets to like the final scene, there's a very crowd pleasing moment where it pretty much almost turns like into a revenge thriller by the end of the film, and it's weirdly satisfying. In fact, from what I understand, like I talked to someone else who had actually read the book, and from what I understand, the book kind of like has this weird twist where it kind of like tries to frame itself like as a much different, as like a much different storyteller who's behind it. Which I think, I don't know, like the way that I heard it, I felt like it could have worked. But in terms of how this film ends, it does end on a very crowd-pleasing moment, but also still weird. Like, it maintains that weirdness throughout the film, and it doesn't let up. Like, I kind of felt like it was getting a little bit kind of like resting on its laurels by the third act, but then there would always be like another weird twist that would come up and something more bizarre that would happen, and it would just get it would just get weirder and crazier from there, and I wouldn't have it any other way. This is, and I'm not kidding when I say this is funny. I was genuinely laughing out loud so hard at this film. Like there's even moments just where, even moments where like there's supposed to be like a pause and a beat in there, and they just like kind of hold on that. And it becomes funnier, like the more like they're holding back, trying to like figure out where the scene should end, and just like watching like the frustration build on their faces throughout. Everyone in this film is just fantastic. I love Emma Stone's performance. I love her development as a character. Willem Dafoe, kind of like he feels like he's built for this role, like where he's supposed to be kind of like weird and deformed, but also has a lot of heart to him. But he also speaks in the same like matter-of-fact manner as Emma Stone. And Mark Ruffalo just eating up his scenes alive and just having fun with this material. It's such a bizarre film, but it's also very beautiful. I said that like it's shot with like the kind of like fisheye lens, but it also takes liberties of having a lot of the first act be shot in black and white, and then when you actually get to color, it's very like lavish, and there's these very like decadent backgrounds of like the ocean and these very like elaborate sets that look like they're straight out of a painting, and even just like the way that they have like this kind of like circular blur to when like, you know, like the characters look like they're in focus in the foreground, but when you look in the background, there's this kind of like radio blur going on, which kind of encapsulates the characters. I just love the way that the film is shot. Like, it's beautiful to look at. Like, even if you're someone who's just like grossed out by everything, you can still look at this film and say, oh yeah, that's beautiful. I love that shot. Just but I mean, like, if you're willing to go along for the ride, and if you're willing to see like Yargos Lathimos at like maximum levels of surreality and sex and violence and just like heavy duty societal commentary, this film is a lot of fun. I loved how daring it was. I loved how just like how bold it was with how much sex there is in it. I love how just like uproarious the dialogue is here. It's just like it's straight like laugh out loud funny. Like between like this and like Beau's Afraid, which is also another highly provocative film, which I guess I should kind of preference for by saying this. Like, if you thought Beau's Afraid was like too much for you, Poor Things is probably going to be on that same level. Like, 'cause it's on that same weird level where you kind of have to be along for the ride to accept the weirdness, to, you know, to just kind of like go with the bizarre flow that happens here. And if you're willing to, I will say that I like Poor Things a little bit more than Beau's Afraid. But for what the film sets out to do, it is just, I couldn't stop thinking about this film, and it's the funniest goddamn film that I've seen all year. And also, like, you know, for like a film landscape where it feels like we don't have as many films that are erotic, this film just dives into the deep end. Like, I was thinking like the most like daring sexual film I'd see this year would probably be like Infinity Pool from Cronenberg, and then no, here comes Yargos Lathimos, who's kind of like, you know, hold my beer. I'm gonna make the weirdest, wildest film that you'll see all year, and he does. Like, so, in case it needed to be stated again, this is my favorite Lathimos film. This is the funniest film of the year, the horniest film of the year. It is so much fun, and I cannot wait to see it again.